There comes a moment in every life when the world grows quiet, not around us, but within. When the laughter no longer satisfies, when accomplishments feel strangely hollow, and when something deep, wordless, and ancient begins to stare. It is not despair, nor is it joy. It is a murmur from a forgotten part of ourselves, the soul knocking at the door we've locked for too long. Carl Jung did not offer happiness in the conventional sense. His insights did not pander to optimism or empty reassurance. He spoke not to the ego, but to the soul. And this is where we begin, not with a solution, but with a question: what if the happiness you seek is not something to gain, but something you lost? In the endless hum of productivity, comparison, and digital noise, we have forgotten how to listen. Not to the news, or the world, or even each other, but to ourself, the deeper self, the silent self, the one buried under years of masks and mechanisms. Jung called this the self, the totality of who we are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, past and potential. The self is not a product of ambition. It is what remains when ambition fades. It is not formed through approval. It is revealed in stillness. Our modern world measures worth in speed, but the soul speaks slowly. It does not shout. It whispers through dreams, through longings, through discontent. That uneasy feeling you can't explain, that sense of being elsewhere even when life seems fine. That's the voice of the self calling you home. Jung saw this disconnection as the central neurosis of modern man. He observed that people did not suffer from problems. They suffered from meaningless lives. Their happiness was not broken, but misdirected. They searched for joy in things, in accolades in others, and never stopped to ask, whose life am I really living? This is the forgotten language of the soul, not goals, but archetypes, but essence. It is not spoken in words, but in symbols, patterns, and intuition. To recover happiness, we must relearn this language, the inner methods that connects us not only to ourselves, but to all humanity. This journey begins in silence. It begins in honesty. It begins when we dare to stop asking the world for meaning and start listening inward. Are you ready to remember what you already know? Happiness would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness, wrote Carl Jung, not as a poet, but as a truth teller of the soul's deep workings. The world around us preaches the pursuit of happiness. It urges us to climb faster, consume more, perform better, as if joy were a distant reward reserved for those who conquer life's external trials. But what if happiness is not found by moving forward, but by turning inward? What if it is not a prize to be won, but a memory to be recalled? This is the first of Jung's life-changing insights, that happiness is not out there. It is not a destination or an achievement. It is something native to the soul, something that has always been within us, buried beneath layers of cultural conditioning, psychological defense, and spiritual amnesia. We are born with an innate sense of wonder, connection, and presence. Watch any child, and you'll see it. The spontaneous joy in small things, the fearless exploration of the moment, the uninhibited laughter that bursts forth like a song remembered from the past life. But as we grow, we are taught to replace that inner sense of wholeness with external markers of success. We are told who to be, what to want, and where to go. And slowly, the voice of the soul is drowned out by the demands of the world. Jung called this alienation from the self the great tragedy of modern existence. We build impressive lives, but feel hollow inside. We surround ourselves with comfort, but ache with emptiness. Why? Because we are living someone else's story, wearing a mask, chasing shadows, exiling our own truth in favor of approval. The path to reviving happiness, Jung said, is not through addition, but subtraction. Not through becoming more, but becoming less false. It is a process of remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. What you loved before fear taught you to settle. What your soul longed for before your mind learned to calculate. To remember happiness is to return to the source. And that source is not in the future. It is in your forgotten self, the one who still dreams, still listens, still believes. You do not need to chase joy. You need only clear the path that leads back to it. And in that remembering, you are made whole. To journey toward happiness, you must first pass through a place you were taught to avoid. The dark corners of yourself. The rejected truths, the parts you have hidden even from your own eyes. Carl Jung called this place the shadow, the psychological underworld where all the unloved, unacknowledged, and repressed parts of ourselves reside. Modern culture idolizes light. We are told to stay positive, think happy thoughts, and banish negativity. But this one-sided pursuit of light comes at a great cost. It creates a false self, polished, agreeable, smiling, while casting everything else into darkness. And in that darkness, our shadow begins to grow. But the shadow is not evil. It is not your enemy. It is simply everything you are, but have been taught not to be. It includes your anger, your envy, your rage, your desire, your fear, your ambition, and even your creativity. Anything that does not fit your conscious identity, that which your persona cannot hold, is banished into the unconscious. Jung understood that the more we reject these parts of ourselves, the more powerful they become. What we refuse to face within eventually rises without, in projections, in compulsions, in anxiety and depression. The shadow ignored becomes fate. Yet within this darkness lies the seed of your happiness. Because the shadow, when integrated, becomes a wellspring of vitality, authenticity, and freedom. The key to wholeness is not perfection, it is integration. And to integrate is to make conscious what was once unconscious. To say to the lost parts of yourself, you too belong. This is not easy. Shadow work requires brutal honesty. It demands you confront your hidden motives, your buried ones, your darkest fantasies. It means owning the parts of you that make you uncomfortable, and understanding them not as shameful, but as human. And here lies the paradox. The man who has faced his darkness is not more dangerous. He is more peaceful, because he no longer fears what lives within. He no longer needs to pretend. He has nothing to hide and therefore nothing to defend. True happiness does not come from being good. It comes from being whole. And to be whole, you must walk into your shadow, not to destroy it, but to listen, to learn, to reclaim what was lost. For within the shadow lies the very energy you need to feel fully alive. To belong, it is one of our most ancient needs. From our earliest moments, we shape ourselves in response to the gaze of others. We smile to receive warmth. We obey to receive praise. We perform to avoid rejection. And slowly, without noticing, we begin to craft a self that is not entirely true, but socially acceptable. Carl Jung named this construct the persona, the mask we wear to interface with society. It is not inherently deceptive. In fact, it is necessary. We all must play roles: the teacher, the student, the parent, the friend. But the danger arises when we forget that it is a role, when the mask becomes the face, when the role becomes the identity. The persona is seductive. It wins applause. It fits in. It protects us from judgment. But it also limits us. It becomes a golden cage, adorned with compliments built on expectations and locked from the inside. And in time, it estranges us from ourselves. Jung observed this with piercing clarity. Many people came to him not with clinical symptoms, but with existential distress. They had everything: careers, families, reputations, and yet felt hollow. They had succeeded in the outer world, but failed to nourish the inner one. Their persona had become so dominant that their true self had been buried beneath it. And this is where unhappiness festers. Because joy cannot live in pretense. It does not breathe in the air of performance. The more we depend on external validation, the more we lose access to our inner voice. We begin to live someone else's life, their values, their ideals, their desires, and forget the shape of our own soul. To revive happiness, we must become aware of the masks we wear. Not to tear them off with violence, but to loosen their grip with compassion. To ask, who am I when no one is watching? Who am I beneath the expectations? Who am I when I stop performing? It is in these moments of raw, unfiltered being that the true self emerges. And though this self may not be polished, it is real. Though it may not be approved of, it is alive. When we dare to live from that place, not from persona, but from presence, we touch something sacred. We rediscover our voice, we rediscover our joy, and most importantly, we rediscover the quiet dignity of being true. There is a lie hidden at the core of modern comfort. The idea that suffering is a flaw in the human condition, something to be eliminated, avoided, or numbed. We are told that a successful life is a painless one, that happiness is the reward for escaping discomfort. But Carl Jung, like the ancient philosophers before him, shattered this illusion with quiet force. As suffering is not the enemy. It is the teacher. It is the furnace in which the soul is shaped. Jung did not romanticize suffering, but he recognized its necessity. He understood that meaning is not found in the absence of pain, but often because of it. Like fire that tempers steel, suffering purifies the human spirit, not by breaking us, but by burning away the illusions we cling to. The truth is difficult to accept. No one seeks pain willingly. But Jung saw that those who walk through suffering consciously emerge transformed, not bitter, but wise, not hardened, but deepened. In his theory of individuation, the process by which a person becomes a true, whole self, suffering plays a central role. It is often the catalyst for awakening. Crisis cracks the shell of the false self. Loss strips away our attachments. Depression turns our gaze inward. And in that dark night of the soul, we meet parts of ourselves we had long abandoned. This is not the suffering of victimhood. It is the suffering of transformation. It asks not, why is this happening to me? But what is this trying to reveal within me? It requires courage, the kind of courage that sits with pain rather than fleeing it, that listens rather than distracts. And in this sacred endurance, something extraordinary happens. We begin to feel alive again, not because life becomes easier, but because it becomes real, honest, whole. Jung believed that suffering carves space within the soul. It makes room for insight, for humility, for compassion. It teaches us that we are not invincible, but we are resilient, that we are not flawless, but we are beautifully human. The lotus grows in the mud, the phoenix rises from ashes, and the soul, too, requires darkness to remember its light. Happiness born of ease is fragile, but happiness forged in suffering is unshakable, because it is rooted not in circumstances but in truth. And truth, once seen, cannot be forgotten. There is a quiet madness in our age, a collective obsession with perfection. We curate our lives to appear flawless, our bodies to be ageless, our reputations to be unassailable. And yet, beneath the polished surface lies a gnawing emptiness, a persistent sense that something is missing, that we are not quite enough. Carl Jung confronted this delusion with disarming clarity. He said, "I'd rather be whole than good." In that single line, he revealed the soul's true hunger, not for perfection, but for integrity. Not for appearing immaculate, but for being real. Perfection, as it is understood today, is an illusion. It demands denial. To appear perfect, one must suppress flaws, deny emotions, and hide wounds. It creates a fragmented self, one that is constantly performing, constantly self-policing, constantly afraid of exposure. And in this relentless chase, happiness withers. For no joy can survive in a life lived as a facade. Wholeness, on the other hand, is a return. It is the sacred act of gathering all the scattered pieces of oneself, the broken, the beautiful, the rejected, the radiant, and saying, "This is me." It does not require that you be without sin, but that you be without shame. Jung's psychology was built not on idealism, but on acceptance. He saw that to truly heal, we must allow contradictions within ourselves. We must hold tension between light and shadow, joy and grief, confidence and vulnerability. The soul is not linear, it is vast, paradoxical, and deep. And when we stop trying to be perfect, something extraordinary occurs. We become human. We begin to live with honesty. We begin to speak truths we once buried. We begin to accept others not as we wish them to be, but as they are, because we have finally done so with ourselves. True happiness cannot be manufactured. It arises when we are aligned, not with an image, but with our essence. When we no longer spend our days performing, but participating, not in an idea of life, but in life itself. To be whole is to carry your wounds without apology, your flaws without shame, and your truth without fear. You do not need to be perfect to be worthy of joy. You only need to be fully yourself. And in that raw, unfiltered humanity, happiness returns, quietly, powerfully, and on its own terms. There are moments in life when all the noise falls away, when success rings hollow. Relationships feel distant, and joy seems like a memory you can't quite retrieve. In these moments, a strange silence takes over, not peaceful, but penetrating. It is not depression, but disorientation, not despair, but the absence of meaning. It is the soul's way of saying you are far from yourself. Carl Jung understood this silence. He saw it as a signal, not a sickness. To him, the discontent of the modern person was not a pathology, but a cry, a sacred rebellion of the soul against a life too shallow, too fast, too false. He once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. We fill our days with distractions. We scroll, consume, compete, achieve, not always because we desire more, but because we fear what we might find if we ever stopped." This is the fire Jung spoke of, the inner flame that both illuminates and burns. To look into it is to see the parts of yourself you've denied, the choices you've avoided, the dreams you've buried. It is a mirror that does not flatter, but reveals. It shows you not the life you live, but the one you were meant to live before fear took the wheel. Most avoid this fire. They call it too intense, too uncertain, too dark. But those who dare to gaze into it often find something unexpected. Not condemnation, but clarity. The flame may burn, but it also warms. It may consume illusions, but it leaves behind truth. And in that truth, something changes. You begin to see that your unhappiness was not proof of failure, but a signpost, a guide. An inner rebellion against a life that was too small for your soul. You begin to feel again, not just pain, but wonder. Not just loss, but longing. You begin to remember dreams that once made your heart race. And perhaps, for the first time in years, you begin to feel alive. Happiness, then, is not a surface emotion. It is the quiet echo that returns when you align your life with your truth. It does not come from escaping the fire, but from standing in it long enough to remember who you are. Look into the flame. You may find the face you had forgotten, your own. Carl Jung was not alone in his understanding of the soul, though his language was modern. His insights echo a wisdom far older. The voices of the Stoics, the mystics, the philosophers who walked before him and whispered the same truth through different tongues. Happiness is not a pursuit, but a practice of being. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic sage, wrote in his Meditations, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself." This is not a call to asceticism, but to self-reliance. It speaks to the same interiority that Jung insisted on, the idea that joy cannot be imported, only uncovered. Epictetus, once a slave and later a teacher of emperors, told his students, "Man is not disturbed by things, but by the view he takes of them." This is the groundwork of cognitive awareness, that it is not the world that breaks us, but our interpretation of it. Jung, too, recognized this. He understood that suffering often stems not from the wound itself, but from our refusal to face it, to feel it, to learn from it. Jung stood as a bridge between two worlds, the clinical and the mystical, the empirical and the symbolic. He was a psychologist by training, but a philosopher by nature. He saw dreams not as neural static, but as messages from the unconscious. He saw myths not as outdated fictions, but as universal truths encoded in story, and in this, he aligned with ancient thinkers who believed that truth was not merely a matter of logic, but of the soul's deep recognition. Even Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, taught that the unexamined life is not worth living. Jung, in his own era, completed this idea that the examined life is not just worth living, it is the only life capable of happiness. The ancients did not promise ease, they promised depth. They offered no shortcuts, only inner roads. The kind that win through suffering, silence, reflection, and ultimately transformation. In reviving Jung's teachings, we do more than revisit a psychologist's theory. We restore a lineage. We pick up the thread woven through millennia, a thread that connects the soul of man across time and culture. A thread that says happiness is not given, it is remembered. And to remember it, you must return, not to society, but to yourself. Carl Jung often spoke in symbols, and none more powerfully than the symbol of alchemy. To many, alchemy is a quaint relic of the past, a mystical pursuit to turn lead into gold. But to Jung, it was something far more profound. He saw in it a mirror of the psyche, a metaphor for the transformation of the soul. In alchemical terms, your suffering is the lead, and happiness, real, grounded, enduring happiness, is the gold. But it cannot be manufactured. It must be forged. This is the process Jung called individuation, the unfolding of the self through conscious engagement with all aspects of your being. It is not a spiritual escape, nor a psychological trick. It is inner work, slow, painful, necessary, the refining fire that purifies illusion and exposes truth. The alchemical stages mirror this internal transformation. Negredo, the blackening, when life falls apart and you confront your shadow. Albedo, the whitening, when insight begins to emerge from within. Rubedo, the reddening, when your fragmented self begins to integrate into something whole and alive. Many resist this path. It does not promise pleasure. It does not offer quick fixes. It demands honesty, endurance, humility. It demands that you let the parts of yourself that are false die, the masks, the lies, the borrowed identities, and that you trust something more real will take their place. And yet, those who walk this path find something that cannot be bought. A happiness that no longer depends on outcomes, praise, or possession. A quiet confidence born not from external validation, but from knowing who you are, fully, deeply, intimately. Jung's inner alchemy invites us to meet ourselves with the same reverence we once reserved for gods. It asks us to stop looking out and start looking in. To listen to the symbols of our dreams, the messages in our suffering, the wisdom hidden in our wounds. You do not need to be more. You need to become more yourself. That is the gold. And once touched, it changes everything. You become less reactive, more reflective. Less anxious, more anchored. Less consumed by the noise of life and more attuned to its meaning. This is the true happiness Jung offered. Not a constant high, but a steady flame. Not a life without chaos, but a self that can stand calmly within it. This is what it means to be whole. There comes a time in every soul's journey when the world's promises lose their power. When no achievement, no possession, no fleeting pleasure can fill the quiet ache that lingers within. It is in this sacred emptiness, this moment of surrender, that something ancient begins to stir. A whisper not from the outside, but from within. Carl Jung never promised easy answers. He did not point toward external triumphs. He pointed inward, toward the self, the totality of all you are and all you are becoming. Toward the forgotten light buried beneath the masks, the roles, the wounds. And he reminded us that light was never extinguished, only hidden. You have spent years building a life, but have you built a self? You have pursued happiness. But have you paused to ask, whose definition have I been chasing? In a world that rewards image, the courage to be authentic becomes an act of rebellion, to be whole in an age of fragmentation, to be present in an era of distraction, to feel deeply in a culture that numbs. This is not weakness. This is strength, and it is the soil in which true happiness grows. The light you seek is not a destination. It is a return, a homecoming to your most honest, most vulnerable, most human self. It is the breath beneath your anxiety, the clarity beyond your confusion, the calm that remains when all illusions fall away. You are not broken. You are unfinished. You are not lost. You are unfolding. And happiness is not found in the peak moments alone, but in the sacred ordinary, the still mornings, the quiet awareness, the honest conversations, the unfiltered presence with life as it is. Jung's final gift is not instruction, but invitation. To walk your own path, to trust your inner voice, to reclaim the forgotten fragments of yourself and weave them into something holy. You do not need to become someone else to be happy. You need only remember who you are beneath who you've been told to be. That light still burns. It waits for you, not in some distant future, but here in this very breath. And when you remember it, even for a moment, you will know you were never chasing happiness. You were always chasing your own reflection. If these words have stirred something in you, a quiet recognition, a forgotten longing, a flicker of light in a darkened room, then do not let that moment pass unnoticed. This is not mere inspiration. It is a summons. Carl Jung's wisdom was never meant to remain confined to books, quotes, or quiet study. His insights are alive, meant to be lived. And if you've listened this far, it's not by accident. Something within you is already waking up. You may feel tired of seeking. You may be disillusioned with temporary fixes and surface-level advice. You may feel that happiness has eluded you, but perhaps it hasn't. Perhaps it has only been waiting quietly, patiently, for you to go deeper, not outward into the noise, but inward into the silence. This is your invitation, not from me, but from the forgotten self within you. The part that knows your truth, that remembers your joy, that still believes in meaning. Begin there. Begin by turning away from distraction and toward presence. Begin by listening to your dreams again, not just the ones at night, but the ones you buried long ago. Begin by asking difficult questions. What do I fear? What am I pretending not to know? What part of me have I abandoned to fit in? These are not casual questions. They are keys. You do not need to become a philosopher or a mystic to walk this path. You only need to become honest. And in that honesty, life opens, not all at once, but moment by moment, like sunlight slowly breaking through a dense forest. If these teachings speak to you, consider making this space, this channel, a part of your journey. Subscribe not just to receive more content, but to signal to yourself that you are ready to go deeper, to move from passive observation to active reflection, to leave behind shallow waters and swim toward something real. And in the comments, do not perform, reflect. Share what stirred you. Name the mask you're ready to remove. Honor the pain that taught you. Recognize the part of you that is ready, not for more noise, but for more truth. This is not the end. It is the beginning of your return. You are not alone. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are awakening. And in that awakening, happiness is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you remember, something you become.